Welcome to another of the Fin Talks series of podcasts organised by FinanceMalta. I'm Vanessa MacDonald, and here today I'm going to be discussing some of the work done by ZN. With me is the CEO, Mike Wardle. And Mike, what we're going to talk about are two main surveys done through ZN. Perhaps people are already familiar with the Global Financial Services Index, but you also do a green finance one. But let's start with the index first. You've now recently published your 38th one. Some interesting findings, although perhaps not too many surprises. But what are the main things that have been changing the ranking of the different financial centres?
Well, I think first of all to say there's really tight competition between financial centres. In the top of the index, there's only one rating point separates the leading four centres, each of them. And so we're just seeing, continuing to see the leading centres really consolidating their position at the top. There's quite a lot of stability amongst the leading centres at the top of the index. And the leading centres are good across the board. You know, they've got good business environment, a good reputation, they have strong human capital measures, their infrastructure is really strong.
There's the full ecosystem,
the full ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And so what we're seeing is financial centres that are keeping up with the trends in digital technology in particular, managing to continue to be strong across the board. And so their regulatory systems are attuned to fintech and to the digital environment. They're managing to recruit the right people, so they have data scientists working alongside finance people to make the most of the digital environment, and that's the real trend. We're seeing the people who are good at fintech and good at digitization continuing to make progress in the index.
I find it so interesting that, as you say, especially when you get up to the top of the index, that there are actually very few changes because a lot of countries are trying to set up a new strategy for financial services, etc., or as a, for their work as a financial centre. So I'm not sure what scope there is. Do people actually move up and down? Is there more volatility in the centre of the index and at the bottom?
There is. There's a fair amount of movement in the index. People moving up a few rank places or down a few rank places. Including Malta, up a few places in the last two editions. And so we do see movement, and there have been some striking examples of people who've done really well recently. I might take the example of Mauritius. It was on the FATF grey list a few years ago, had to put a lot of work in to revise its regulatory and supervisory regime, and it's reaped the benefits of that moving up the index. So we do see movement, but the leading centres are so well established as full-service financial centres. Basically, places some of that New York or London or Hong Kong, if you have a financial services need, you can turn up in those cities and you can find someone who can find the solution to your problem.
You've mentioned three countries there. You've got political, I wouldn't call it turmoil, but you've got a very different political system in the US now than you did, and also in Hong Kong with the takeover of China and so on. So does that work independently of politics?
To an extent it does. I mean, you look at London as well. We left the European Union.
I suppose, yes, Brexit is also
which is a major shift. And there were some concerns that London's financial services would lose out. And to an extent we have. We've lost some jobs to other parts of the EU. But we've actually recruited more jobs in that time in the City of London than we've lost. So it does seem that financial services, where there's real depth of knowledge and expertise, seem to ride above the political storms a bit and manage to carry on even though there's maybe uncertainty in the political world.
You mentioned that Malta has moved up a few places. That's also good news, because at the end of the day we were also on the FATF grey list and worked very hard to get out of it as well.
Indeed.
So are we doing well? Are we heading in the right direction?
You're heading in the right direction. I think the strengths of you particularly, and when we look into the mechanics of the data, you see that you have a very strong reputation among people working in professional services. You're very strong about people working in fintech. You're strong in people working in government and regulatory. Less strong when you come to insurance and investment management people. So that's a kind of pointer to Malta as to where you perhaps need to do a bit more work to persuade people of your strengths.
Yes, but it means persuading people to move here, though.
It means persuading people to move there.
Because, as you know, we've got this pretty much zero effective unemployment. So
yes, and I think one of the messages from the data on Malta, which is it's not news to anybody in Malta in finance, is that human capital is one of the less strong areas of FinanceMalta's offering, and that whole impetus to attract and retain talent really has to be a focus, I think, going forward. It's not necessarily easy to do, but Malta's a very beautiful place to live. It offers a great deal, and the more that you can attract really good talent to Malta and keep it in Malta, the better you will do.
Indeed. Well, it's good as well that we've got a national strategy now for financial services. We've got a labour migration policy and so on, and I think all of these things will dovetail now.
Yeah.
We're seeing an awful lot of work being done, as we said, after the grey list as well, from the government side and the regulatory side, as being prompted as well by the private providers. So somebody's listening, and with all three parties working together.
Absolutely, and the fact you have a strategy is really
That's
important.
already something.
There's many financial centres who don't. I mean, I'd be difficult to point to a strategy for London, for example, as financial services. It's kind of saying, well, look, we're London. Do we need a strategy? I'd suggest yes, you do. But it's really good to see.
Well, there is nothing that cannot be improved.
Exactly.
One of the other things I wanted to speak to you about was your Green Finance Index, which was perhaps a little bit more interesting in that it highlighted some major concerns, and there's actually been a drop of confidence of 8.83% in the past 12 months. What's going wrong?
Well, green finance is different than general finance. It is really policy driven. People don't go into green finance yet because it's the obvious thing to do from a financial perspective. They go because there's a policy and regulatory framework which pushes people in that direction. And what we've seen, of course, is the US backing away from its commitment to green anything. And talking to people in the States, even mentioning the words ESG is now seen as something that one doesn't do. You might carry on doing the same work, but you call it enhanced analytics or something else.
Yes.
But that lack of political drive is really important.
The US is not in the top 10.
The US is not in the top 10. There's no US
9
centre.
out of the 10 spots are taken up by Western Europe.
Western European centres are leading on green finance. It says an awful amount because
it is regulatory driven, yes?
It's regulatory driven. There's an awful lot of interest, both from a public demand point of view, as well as from government and regulatory drive, to see sustainability as a major drive of business more generally.
But not in the US.
Not in the US at present, under the current administration. And so we've seen places like New York drop back quite sharply in the Global Green Finance Index. And that is, I think, a direct result of the governmental and regulatory change. What it does, however, is leave a kind of vacuum in terms of international leadership. And so we're looking very carefully, yes, at Western Europe, who are still very committed, but also looking at Asia Pacific. We're seeing, for example, Korea doing very well in green finance. We're seeing China paying a lot of attention to green finance alongside the introduction of renewable energy. And there seems to be a kind of a leadership vacuum in terms of international regulation, which the US has withdrawn from. So we're kind of tracking this quite closely, of course, but we're seeing at the moment Western Europe just sweeping the floor in terms of the Global Green Finance Index.
The whole point of green finance was actually to use that sort of pull factor when it came to the impacts, the negative impacts of climate change, etc. So what's going to fill that vacuum? Because if it's not really working enough, how are we going to encourage good behaviour?
Well, I think what it does is give actual the centres that are good at green finance potentially a competitive advantage. You're saying, for those people who want to do the right thing, and there are still very many people out there who do, then if you need financing, come to Europe. If you ever need financing, come to Malta. We've mentioned you sit around halfway down the league table in the Global Financial Centres Index. You're 44th in the Global Green Finance Index, so performing some 20 places better in green finance. So we think there's some competitive advantage for those people who are taking green finance, given importance to green finance as one of the strands of work that they're interested in. And we see China looking over the wall thinking, well, we can do that.
It's very interesting because we're talking about it being regulatory driven, but not too long ago it was actually being driven by the man on the street, by the casual investor who was actually looking at big companies and saying, well, we don't agree with their policies, whether it's, dolphin-friendly tuna or, fossil fuel use and so on. Is that not happening anymore? Because that was the driving force for a lot of the changes.
I think that public demand is certainly a factor. And when we ask people in our surveys about what's driving green finance, then the two big things are customer demand on the one side and regulatory push on the other. So it's those things working together that make a real difference. And there does seem to be a correlation between those jurisdictions where the general population and the government are all pushing towards sustainability, where green finance does particularly well. And we can look at some financial centres, particularly places like Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Luxembourg, who score really very highly on the Global Green Finance Index, and we see that actually the whole economy in those jurisdictions is really focused around sustainability. So it makes a real difference as to how green the government wants to be and how they're pushed to be green by their population.
Sustainability, it is the buzzword, isn't it, at the moment?
It is.
Mike, what can I say? Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. I can't wait to hear what the next index is going to be all about.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.